Hello everyone. Before we dive in, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're watching. This helps YouTube show you more stories like this one. Now let's get started. I was 16 years old enough to remember every detail clearly and young enough that the feeling of that night never really left me. It was Christmas Eve, and heavy snow had been falling since late afternoon. The kind of snow that comes down thick and quiet, the kind that makes the world feel smaller and more closed off. Our house sat in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where nothing really happened and everyone knew everyone else. That night felt calm and normal, almost too calm. We were all in the living room. The lights were low except for the Christmas tree glowing in the corner. The room smelled like pine needles, eggnog, and something warm from the kitchen that had been cooking all day. We were sitting close together, opening stocking gifts like we did every year. Cheap candy, socks, little jokes wrapped in tissue paper. The snow outside made everything feel safe, like we were sealed inside our own small world. Then the sound came. 3 loud bangs on the front door knocker. Not tapping, not someone testing the door. 3 hard hits, spaced out just enough to feel deliberate. The sound cut through the room and stopped everything at once. The TV was off, no music playing, so it felt louder than it probably was. My stomach dropped immediately. It was late, the snow was bad, and nobody ever came by unannounced on Christmas Eve. We all looked toward the front window. The snow was still falling fast, thick enough that it blurred the streetlights. My dad stood up and looked out first. There was no one there. No shape moving away, no shadow, nothing. He grabbed his coat and opened the door anyway, leaning out and looking down. That was when we saw the cat. It was lying across the threshold, half on the porch and half on the snow. A black cat, soaked and bloody, its fur clumped together and dark against the white ground. It was still breathing, shallow and fast. Its eyes were open, wide and glassy, but it didn't move much at all. What hit me right away was the snow around it. It was perfect. No footprints leading up to the door. No tire tracks on the street. Nothing disturbed except where the cat lay. There was no logical way for someone to put it there without leaving some sign. The porch light was on, the snow was deep, and our front yard was wide open. Anyone would have been seen. Anyone would have left tracks. That part made my skin crawl more than the blood did. We didn't stand there long. We brought the cat inside right away. My mom grabbed towels, my dad shut the door tight, and I remember feeling like the house suddenly wasn't as safe as it had been minutes before. The cat didn't fight us. It barely reacted at all. Up close, we could see it was young, probably not even fully grown. Male, not fixed, covered in cuts and bite marks, like it had been attacked by something much bigger or by multiple animals. We cleaned him as best we could and wrapped him up, keeping him warm near the tree. He started to relax a little once he was inside, like he knew he wasn't in danger anymore. I sat on the floor and watched his chest rise and fall. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering whatever answers we might have found. The next few days were tense. We took him to the vet as soon as the roads were clear enough. He had been in a bad fight, but nothing that couldn't heal. He survived. Slowly, he started to act like a normal cat, eating, moving around, watching everything with alert eyes. He stayed with us for a while before my mom gave him to a close friend who lived just down the street. They wanted a cat, and it felt right to keep him close. Months passed. Winter turned into spring. The night on Christmas Eve became one of those strange family stories we talked about sometimes but never fully understood. The cat settled into his new home and became part of their family. They called him Shadow at first, which always felt wrong to me. He wasn't a shadow. He was solid and loud and very much alive. Then one night, about 4 or 5 months later, everything connected in a way none of us expected. Late at night, the cat started howling and screaming in their house. Not normal noise, not hunger or boredom. He was losing his mind, running through the house, knocking things over, waking everyone up. He wouldn't stop. They followed the noise, trying to calm him down, until they smelled smoke. An electrical fire had started in the garage. One of the cars had already caught fire. The flames were spreading, slow but steady, and the garage was full of flammable stuff. Gas cans, paint boxes, old junk. If they had slept through it, the outcome would have been very different. The house could have gone up. The car could have exploded. People could have died. But they woke up in time. Everyone got out. The fire department came. The damage was contained mostly to the garage. The house stood. The family was safe. After that, they changed his name to Clark after Superman. It was half a joke, half a way of admitting that without him, things might have ended badly. He lived a long life after that. He was calm, friendly, and always alert. A good cat. The kind that seems to understand more than it should. What still bothers me is not that he saved them. Animals do things like that sometimes. What bothers me is how he arrived in our lives in the first place. That knock, the timing, the untouched snow. There was no explanation then, and there still isn't one now. Nothing supernatural happened. No ghosts. No signs. Just a series of events that don't quite line up when you think about them too hard. A badly injured cat appearing on a doorstep with no trace of how it got there. A sound that demanded attention. A life that went on to save others. I'm older now, and I don't jump to wild conclusions. I believe in chance, bad luck, and coincidence. But every Christmas Eve, when the snow falls heavy and quiet, I think about that night. I think about how close we all were to missing something important. And I think about how sometimes, even in a normal world, something can happen that leaves you uneasy forever. Not because it was impossible, but because it never made sense at all. It was Christmas Eve and I was 14, old enough to feel brave and stupid in equal parts, young enough to believe my body could take anything. Snow had been falling all day, thick and quiet, the kind that muffles sound and makes everything feel farther away than it really is. The fields were buried, the trees bowed under white weight, and the sky had that low gray look that comes before night fully settles in. Everyone else was inside, warm, getting ready for the next day, but all I could think about was riding. I had been riding long enough that winter didn't scare me, and the snow only made it feel better, like the world belonged to me alone. The stables were about a mile from the house. I knew every step of that walk, every fence post and drift that formed along the path. My boots sank deep with each step, snow packing up around my ankles, my breath fogging in front of my face. The cold had a sharp smell, clean and metallic, and the only sounds were my boots and the distant creak of trees. When I got to the stable, my horse greeted me the same way he always did, impatient, shifting his weight, steam rising off his coat. I brushed him down, the bristles crunching over frozen hair, saddled him up with fingers already numb, and led him out into the snow. The ride back toward the house felt normal at first. The snow was deep but packed enough that he moved easily, his hooves thudding softly. I tied him to my parents' porch like I always did, the rope stiff from cold, and stood there for a moment just listening to him breathe. The house behind me glowed faintly through the windows, warm light spilling onto the snow. It felt safe there. I should have ended it there. Instead, I decided to take him back right away. As I was getting ready, one of my friends came walking up the driveway, bundled up, her head down against the cold. Without thinking, I swung back up and helped her climb on behind me. We rode together to her house, laughing at the way the snow sprayed up around us, the horse moving steady and strong beneath us. I dropped her off and turned back alone, the light already fading fast, that blue-gray dusk pressing in from all sides. On the way back, something in my horse changed. He started to pull forward, not hard at first, just eager. I let him run a little, thinking he just wanted to stretch out. The cold air burned my lungs. My eyes watered, and the world narrowed to the sound of his breathing, and the rhythm of his stride. We came up on my friend's sister walking along the side of the road, and I leaned forward, planning to slow down and offer her a ride. He didn't slow down. I pulled gently at first, then harder, my boots pressing into the stirrups. He ignored it, head down, muscles tight, moving faster. I laughed at first, the way you do when something surprises you and you don't want to admit it scares you. I told myself he would stop at the house. He always did. The driveway came up fast, and instead of turning in and slowing, he went straight through, hooves pounding, snow flying. The road opened up in front of us, dark and slick, and beyond that I could see the crossroads. Cars moved through it, dark shapes sliding past, headlights cutting white lines through the falling snow. Fear hit me all at once, heavy and cold in my stomach. I stood up in the stirrups and pulled on the reins with everything I had. My arms shook, my shoulders burned, and it felt like pulling on iron. He didn't even hesitate. The sound of his gallop filled my head, loud and wild. The road rushed under us, the world blurring at the edges. I remember thinking how big the intersection suddenly looked, how close everything was. There was no room left to fix it. A car came through, big and long, a brand new Ford LTD. One of those cars that looked more like a ship than something meant for the road. My horse tried to jump it. He hit the car chest high, the impact exploding through my body before my mind could catch up. I was thrown forward and sideways, weightless for a split second, then the road slammed into me. The cold vanished, replaced by a hard, blinding shock. I slid across the pavement, spinning, my coat and jeans scraping but holding. Somewhere behind me, my horse flipped, a perfect, horrible motion, then slid past the intersection on his rump, legs scrambling. I lay there staring up at the sky, snow drifting down into my face, my breath coming out in short, sharp bursts. My left wrist burned in a deep, sick way that told me something was very wrong. Everything else felt strangely distant, like my body hadn't decided yet what to do with the pain. I could move my legs. I could feel the road under my back. That realization was grounding in a way I can't really explain. A police car was already there, parked at the intersection, the officer having seen the whole thing. The lights reflected off the snow and the car and my horse, who was somehow back on his feet, shaking, scraped raw along his rump, but alive. The officer checked me over as best he could, but there was no ambulance. The service was out to lunch. Time stretched in a strange way, minutes feeling thick and unreal. Instead of sirens and a stretcher, I ended up in the back of the police car, then in a quiet living room that smelled like food and warmth. I sat there stunned, snow melting off my clothes, my wrist swelling and useless, while children stared at me from the side, unsure what to make of the bloody, shaken stranger in their space. Outside, Christmas Eve continued like nothing had happened. Eventually, the ambulance came back. Eventually, my parents were called. Eventually, I ended up in a hospital, my wrist crushed, my body bruised but alive, my horse healed. The car was wrecked. The snow kept falling. What stays with me isn't just the impact or the pain. It's how fast everything went wrong. How a normal, quiet ride turned into something that could have ended my life in seconds. Every Christmas Eve after that, when the snow gets deep and the roads go quiet, I think about that run toward the intersection, the feeling of pulling with all my strength and realizing it wasn't enough. I survived, and that's the clear ending. But the fear of those seconds never really left. I didn't meet her myself. I knew her through my roommate, who worked evenings at a local gym that ran cheerleading and tumbling classes for kids. I heard about her slowly, in pieces, the way you hear about a storm forming far away before you ever see the clouds. At first it sounded like normal kid stuff. One difficult child in a room full of kids. Someone who didn't fit. That's how it was explained to me at the start. But the more my roommate talked about her, the more uneasy it made me feel, even sitting safely at home, even hearing it secondhand. The gym was one of those places that always smelled faintly of sweat and rubber mats. Bright lights, loud music, banners on the walls. Kids running barefoot, laughing, falling, getting back up. My roommate supervised groups, checked attendance, helped with drills, and dealt with parents. She was used to kids crying, kids acting out, kids being dramatic. None of that bothered her. This was different. The girl joined one of the younger teams. My roommate said she was small for her age, thin, with hair that always looked slightly greasy no matter how clean it probably was. Her eyes were what stuck with people. Not because they were unusual in color, but because of how she looked at others. Too long, too focused. Like she was studying them instead of just seeing them. Almost right away, other kids started acting strange around her. They would cluster away from her on the mats. They would rush to line up anywhere except near her. Some of them started crying before practice even began. At first, adults assumed it was nerves or normal kid drama. But then patterns started showing up. The girl would fixate on certain teammates. She followed them around the gym. She stood too close. When she hugged them, she didn't let go. It wasn't playful. She wrapped her arms high, tight around their necks, squeezing until the other child's face changed color and a coach had to physically pull her off. Afterward, she would smile and make this small, breathy laugh that didn't match the situation. Not loud, not playful, just wrong. She talked a lot about violent things. Not in the way kids sometimes repeat stuff they overhear, but in a way that felt personal. She told other girls she wanted to kill them. She said it casually, like she was talking about the weather. No anger, no raised voice, just a statement. Some of the kids thought she was joking at first. Then they saw her face when she said it, blank, calm. Watching their reaction. Her favorite movie was the newer version of IT, and she made sure everyone knew it. She described scenes from it in detail. She talked about enjoying the fear. My roommate said she would say these things during water breaks, during stretches, moments when adults weren't right next to them. The kids started telling on her, but even that scared them. They were afraid she would hear about it and do something. Coaches began keeping a closer eye on her. They never left her alone with other kids. They positioned themselves nearby during drills. They noted incidents and wrote reports. Still, nothing concrete enough happened to get her removed. No injuries that lasted. No proof of intent. Just a constant feeling of tension that never went away. Then the complaints came. Not from the kids who were scared, but from her mother. The girl told her mom that the other kids didn't like her, that they avoided her, that they were bullying her. The mother came in angry, protective, convinced her child was being singled out. Management panicked. They didn't want trouble. They didn't want accusations. So they made a decision that felt safe on paper and dangerous in reality. There was a mandatory sit-down meeting about bullying. All the kids were brought together. My roommate had to supervise it. No one was allowed to speak freely. No one could explain what was really happening. The scared kids sat there silent, eyes on the floor. The girl sat straight, backed, calm, watching everyone. After that meeting, things got worse. The girl seemed empowered. She knew now that adults weren't going to believe the other kids. She pushed boundaries further. Longer stares, tighter hugs, more graphic statements. The laughter never changed. My roommate said it became obvious that the girl enjoyed the control. She liked knowing she scared people, and that nothing happened to her for it. Parents started pulling their kids out quietly. They didn't complain. They just stopped coming. One coach quit without explanation. The gym lost business. Still, the girl stayed. Still. Her mother defended her. The breaking point came months later. There was an incident serious enough that management couldn't ignore it. My roommate wouldn't go into detail, but it involved marks left on another child's neck. Not accidental. Not rough play. The girl was removed from the program after that. No police. No big scene. Just paperwork and silence. Life at the gym slowly went back to normal. New kids joined. The tension faded. But my roommate never forgot her. Sometimes she would mention how unsettling it was to think about where that girl might be now, older, bigger, more aware. There was no dramatic ending, no sudden reveal, no supernatural explanation. Just a child who scared everyone around her and adults who waited too long to act. What stayed with me was how real it all was. No monsters, no demons. Just a kid with something wrong inside her, slipping through the cracks because no one wanted to say it out loud. The gym kept running. The world moved on. And somewhere out there, that girl did too. I worked at a church program for a while. Even though I was not religious at all, it was a job I took because I needed steady work and because the nonprofit itself did real help in the community. The building was big, old, and always smelled like cleaning spray mixed with cheap food. The program was for kids from rough backgrounds, families with money problems, unstable homes, and too much stress for anyone that young. Every day followed the same schedule. We were each assigned a small group, usually around 7 kids, and we rotated through arts and crafts, outdoor play, games, and snacks. On paper it sounded calm. In reality it was loud, messy, and exhausting. Most of the kids had some kind of issue. Some were angry, some were withdrawn. Some acted way older than they should have. I had seen kids throw chairs, scream until their faces turned red, or shut down so hard they would not move for hours. You learn to expect chaos. You learn to read body language and moods fast. Still, there was one kid who stood out so much that I still think about him years later. He was small for his age, maybe 7 or 8, skinny arms, always wearing the same oversized hoodie no matter how warm it was. He barely spoke to anyone. When he did, it was under his breath, like he was talking to himself more than to the room. His eyes were what got me first. They were flat. Not angry in a loud way, not sad, not scared, just empty and focused. Like he was looking through people instead of at them. Arts and crafts was where things really showed. The other kids would draw messy houses, stick figures, cars, random shapes, or just scribble until time was up. This boy drew the same kinds of things over and over. Knives, guns, bodies. Faces with eyes scratched out. Blood dripping off weapons in thick lines of red crayon. Sometimes he would draw his family, but twisted, with parts missing or crossed out. The level of detail was what made it worse. These were not random shapes that adults read too much into. These were clear images with intent. I would watch him work. He held the crayons tight, pressing hard enough to tear the paper sometimes. He did not look around or react to noise. Chairs scraping, kids laughing, kids crying, nothing pulled his attention away. When I tried to redirect him, guide him towards something else, his hands would pause for a second and then keep going. His mouth would move, barely, and I could hear violent words spill out quietly, like a stream that never shut off. It was not dramatic or loud. It was casual, like listing groceries. Being responsible for kids means you learn not to panic. You document things. You report patterns. You keep notes. I started doing that with him. Dates, behaviors, drawings. I kept the drawings too, putting them in a folder, because throwing them away felt wrong. I felt like if I destroyed them, I would be pretending nothing was happening. During outdoor time, he did not run or play. He stood at the edge of the yard and watched the other kids. His eyes followed them closely, especially when someone fell or got hurt. When a kid scraped their knee and cried, he stared harder, head tilted slightly, like he was studying it. No smile, no reaction, just attention. The part that really stuck with me was the feeling I got when I was near him. It was not fear in a normal sense. It was a cold pressure, like being watched by something that did not care if you noticed it. Adults like to believe kids are harmless, that they grow out of things, that bad behavior always has an easy explanation. This felt different. It felt like something already set in place. I followed protocol and raised concerns. I showed the drawings to supervisors. I explained the patterns. I explained how often the violent themes showed up, how focused he was on them, how little emotion he showed otherwise. I was told to keep an eye on it, and to bring it up with his parent. When his mother came to pick him up one afternoon, I did exactly that. I kept my tone calm and professional. I laid out the facts without exaggerating. I showed her the drawings. She barely looked at them. Her body language said she was tired, done, checked out. She brushed it off as normal kid stuff, said he liked action movies, said he was just creative. She took his hand and walked him out without another glance. After that, nothing changed. If anything, he withdrew more. The drawings got darker. Less color, more black and red, more focus on faces and eyes, less background, more weapons. I stopped feeling surprised and started feeling dread instead. I would catch myself scanning the room when he was there, counting scissors, checking where everyone was sitting. That is not how you want to feel around a child. The program ended that season, and eventually I moved on to another job. I never saw him again. There was no big incident, no dramatic ending, no headline, just distance and time. But the feeling never fully left. Years later, I still think about him when I hear about violent crimes that seem to come out of nowhere. When people say there were no warning signs. When they say everyone was shocked. I think about that small boy, hunched over a table, pressing a crayon so hard it ripped paper. I think about the way his eyes never changed. I think about how easy it was for adults to dismiss something uncomfortable, because dealing with it would have taken effort, time, and resources they did not want to give. What scares me the most is not that he was a kid who liked dark drawings. It is that he showed a steady, consistent obsession with hurting others, and no one with real power stepped in. He was not loud. He was not disruptive enough. He did not cause trouble in a way that forced action. He slipped through the cracks quietly. I do not know where he is now or what he became. I do know that some things do not just disappear on their own. Some things grow when ignored. The program helped a lot of kids, and I believe that. But that boy taught me something I wish I did not know so early in my life. Sometimes the scariest people are not monsters hiding in the dark. Sometimes they are kids sitting at a plastic table, drawing pictures that everyone else is too uncomfortable to really look at. The night we took my nephew to his first movie is burned into my memory in a way I didn't expect. It was supposed to be one of those harmless family moments you barely remember later. My grandma wanted to spoil him. I agreed to drive, and the movie happened to be Infinity War because it was everywhere at the time. He was 7, small for his age. With that stiff posture he always had, like his body was tense even when he was sitting still. The theater smelled like butter and old carpet, and the screen light washed over his face in flashes of blue and red. I remember thinking how quiet he was, how focused, how he never leaned over or fidgeted the way kids usually do. He watched like he was studying something. When the snap happened, the room reacted the way it always does. Gasps, shifting seats, that shared shock that rolls through a crowd. I felt it too, that punch in the stomach. Without really thinking, I turned my head to check on him, expecting excitement or confusion or nothing at all. What I saw instead stopped me cold. He lifted his hands slowly, calmly, and snapped his fingers in perfect time. His eyes locked onto my grandma's face, not the screen, not the lights, just her. There was no smile, no joke, no sense of copying what he saw because it looked cool. It felt deliberate, like he understood exactly what it meant in his own way. The look on his face was flat and heavy. It wasn't playful. It wasn't cute. It felt wrong, like watching someone test a thought they had already practiced. The rest of the movie kept playing, but I wasn't there anymore. I was stuck in that moment, replaying it again and again. My grandma didn't notice anything unusual. She was focused on the screen, wiping her eyes at the emotional parts. I kept watching him instead. He sat back, hands folded, eyes forward, calm like nothing had happened. My chest felt tight. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking it. Kids do weird things. Kids copy movies. But this didn't feel like that. It felt like confirmation. I had been carrying a quiet fear about him for years, something I never said out loud because it sounded insane and cruel. Ever since he was 4, there was something off in the way he moved through the world. He didn't react to people the way others did. Pain didn't seem to bother him the way it should. When other kids cried, he watched them like objects. Not curious, not concerned, just watching. There were moments where he was gentle, moments where he seemed sad, moments where he clearly cared about certain people. That's what made it worse. It meant he wasn't empty. It meant he could feel something, just not what he should. As he got older, the stories started to stack up. Problems at school, long meetings with teachers, notes sent home. Then the incident that finally forced everyone to admit things were serious. He tried to stab a teacher with a sharp object he had hidden in his bag. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't rough play. It was intentional enough that they moved him to a special school almost immediately. I remember sitting in my car after hearing that, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. I felt sick, but not surprised. That was the worst part. The lack of surprise scared me more than the act itself. I see parts of myself in him sometimes, and that might be why this sticks so deep. I was an only child too. Older parents. A lot of time alone. A lot of internet access before I should have had it. I know how easy it is for your sense of right and wrong to get warped when screens raise you more than people do. I know how anger can feel safer than confusion. I can almost empathize with him. Almost. But there is a line he seems to cross without hesitation. Where I felt guilt, he feels nothing. Where I hesitated, he commits. My ex-girlfriend noticed it too when we were together. She never said it dramatically. She would just go quiet after being around him. Later, she would say she felt uncomfortable, uneasy, like something was watching her too closely. Over the years, that feeling only grew stronger for both of us. Every family gathering had a tension under it for me. I would watch where he was, what he was holding, who he was near. I hated myself for doing it, but I couldn't stop. The feeling I get around him now is hard to describe without sounding cruel. It feels like waiting for something you know is coming, but can't see yet. Like standing near a cracked dam, listening to the pressure build, knowing it will give way someday but not knowing when. Except instead of water, it's people. Instead of damage, it's lives. That thought makes me feel sick, but it also feels honest. It feels like inevitability. That night after the movie, nothing else happened. No outburst. No scene. Just the drive home, the quiet, the normal ending to an abnormal feeling. But something inside me shifted permanently. The snap wasn't the cause of my fear. It was proof. Proof that whatever I sensed in him wasn't imaginary. Wasn't just me being paranoid or dramatic. It was there, forming, growing, taking shape in ways I couldn't influence or stop. I don't think he is a monster. I don't think he is possessed or cursed or anything like that. I think he is a sad kid with something broken in him. Something that the world and the internet and bad luck have sharpened instead of softened. That might be worse. Because it means there is no clear villain, no easy fix, no moment where it all makes sense. Just time moving forward and the quiet hope that nothing terrible happens, even though every instinct in me says it will. What scares me most is how familiar that feeling has become. The dread, the waiting, the sense that I am watching a future unfold in slow motion, powerless to change its direction. It doesn't feel like fear anymore. It feels like grief for something that hasn't happened yet, and the knowledge that when it does, everyone will look back and say the signs were always there. Back in 2023, 5 of my coworkers and I were sent to a city in the Visayas to film a series of videos for work. There were 6 of us in total. I was the writer. We had a producer, a project manager, and 2 camera guys. It was a tight schedule, early call times, long days, and a lot of pressure to get everything right. From the outside, the trip looked routine. Flights, hotel, shoot, go home. Nothing about it should have stayed with me the way it did. The hotel we were booked into looked old but cared for. The walls were clean, the floors were polished. And the staff did their jobs quietly. It had the kind of stillness you only find in buildings that have been standing for a long time. Between the elevators on the ground floor was an altar. It was small, carefully arranged, and clearly respected. People had left offerings there. What bothered me wasn't the altar itself, but the feeling it gave off. It felt heavy, like the space around it had been used and reused for a very long time. I remember staring at it longer than I meant to. I felt like I was being watched, not in a dramatic way, but in a slow, patient way. I nodded without really knowing why and moved on. It felt safer to acknowledge it than to ignore it. They reserved 4 rooms for 6 people, which already felt strange. I ended up alone in a 2-person room, far down the hallway, right next to the fire exit where they stored extra folding beds. The hallway itself was narrow and poorly lit. The lights had that yellow tone that makes shadows stretch longer than they should. The first night, after a full day of shooting, I finally had time to slow down. That was when things started to feel wrong. I noticed that the jewelry I had left on one side of the bathroom sink was now on the other side. At first, I blamed myself. Long day, tired brain. But I stood there trying to remember doing it, and nothing came up. The room felt occupied in a way I couldn't explain. Not like someone was hiding, but like the air itself was aware of me. I tried to calm myself down. I had no salt, no tools, nothing that would normally help me feel grounded. I focused on the sounds of the building, the hum of distant air conditioners, footsteps far away. I chose the bed closest to the wall and stayed there. The rest of the room felt colder, especially the corner farthest from the bed. I barely slept, but the night passed without anything else happening. The second day was brutal. We were up before sunrise and didn't stop until late evening. Everyone was exhausted, so we decided to get drinks and stay together in one room. I went back to mine to grab a few things. Before I went in, I noticed the folding beds by the fire exit. They were stacked neatly, pushed against the wall the way housekeeping would leave them. I went into my room, grabbed what I needed, and left within 2 minutes. The door was still partly open. No one passed me in the hallway. But when I stepped back out, the folding beds were scattered. Some were angled away from the wall. One looked like it had been dragged slightly forward. There was no sound, no sign of anyone nearby. My stomach dropped. The logical part of my brain tried to explain it away, but nothing fit. I felt exposed standing there, like the hallway was too long and too quiet. I didn't stay there. I walked fast, almost ran to the room where everyone else was. I made an excuse about wanting us all together for the night. I could tell by the way they looked at me that something was off, but no one pressed me. When 2 of us went back to another room to grab bedding, I stayed in the hallway. That's when I saw it. Not clearly, not like a person standing there, but a shape moving where nothing should have moved. A pale blur passed across the far end of the hallway, cutting through the wall space where doors and lights broke up the surface. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. I felt dizzy, like my depth perception had failed. I had never experienced anything visual like that before. It scared me more than anything else that had happened, because it felt like my own senses had turned against me. The rest of the night was a blur. We stayed together. I tried to keep my breathing steady, tried to act normal. Eventually, I told them what I had experienced. One of them admitted they had felt something strange too, especially around my side of the floor. No one laughed it off. We stayed awake longer than planned, and when we finally slept, it was shallow and restless. I kept waking up, checking the corners of the room, listening for sounds that never fully came. The third morning arrived quietly. Sunlight made the hotel feel less threatening, but the weight was still there. We packed up and checked out without any issues. As we walked past the elevators one last time, I looked at the altar again. In daylight, it looked ordinary. Still, that heavy feeling returned. I stood there for a moment and gathered my thoughts. I didn't feel anger or fear anymore. Just a deep sense of intrusion, like we had walked through a place that wasn't meant to be disturbed by strangers rushing in and out with cameras and deadlines. In my head, I acknowledged that we were leaving, and that whatever had been there long before us would remain long after. Nothing followed us home. No strange dreams, no lingering fear. But the experience changed the way I look at unfamiliar places. I don't think what happened was supernatural in the way people like to imagine. I think it was a mix of exhaustion, unfamiliar surroundings, old structures, and a mind pushed past its comfort zone. The hotel was old. It had history. It had silence baked into its walls. We stepped into it without understanding it, stayed just long enough to feel its weight, and left before it fully swallowed us. That's what makes it scary to me. Not the idea of something unreal, but how thin the line is between feeling safe and realizing you're not as in control of your senses as you think. I stayed in a hotel in Quezon City that had a mall right beside it. It was a work trip, the kind where the days start early and never really slow down. From the moment I checked in, my schedule was packed with meetings, site visits, and constant walking. By the time night came, my legs felt heavy and my head felt full, like I was still running even while standing still. The hotel was clean and modern, the kind that looks calm but empty once the day crowd disappears. I was given an executive suite, which meant I was placed on one of the higher floors. I remember being on the 22nd floor. The elevator ride felt longer than usual, and when the doors opened, the hallway was quiet in a way that made every step sound louder. Most of my team stayed on the lower floors. On my floor there were hardly any signs of life. No footsteps, no voices, no room service carts. Just a long hallway with thick carpet and dim lights that barely reached the walls. I remember thinking it felt more like an office building at night than a hotel. When I reached my room, I locked the door, threw my bag on the chair, and stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle. I have a habit when staying in hotels. I always leave a dim light on when I sleep. I do not like complete darkness in places that are not my own home. The shadows feel unfamiliar, and my mind tends to fill in gaps it should not. That night, though, my body gave up before my habits could take over. I showered quickly, barely dried my hair, and collapsed into bed. I remember the room lights being on, but I was too tired to care. My phone said around 11 p.m. when I last checked the time. After that, everything went black. I do not know how long I was asleep when it happened. All I know is that I woke up instantly, like a switch was flipped inside me. Something slammed hard into my back. It was not a gentle push or the feeling of rolling into something. It was a sharp, heavy impact, strong enough to knock the air out of me for a second. At the same time, I heard a loud male shout right next to me, close enough that it felt like someone was leaning over my shoulder. My body reacted before my mind did. My heart started pounding so fast it felt painful. I reached blindly for the light switch beside the bed, my hands shaking, my fingers missing it once before finally hitting it. The room filled with light all at once. Every lamp, every ceiling light came on. I sat up, breathing hard, expecting to see someone standing there. There was no one. The bed was exactly how I left it, except for the comforter. It was thick and heavy, tucked around me. I realized then that the impact I felt on my back was strange. The comforter should have softened it, but it felt direct, like skin-to-skin contact. That detail made my stomach twist. I got out of bed and checked the door first. It was still bolted from the inside. The latch had not been moved. I checked the lock twice, pressing on the door just to be sure. It did not budge. I moved slowly around the room, my senses stretched thin. I checked the bathroom, pulling the shower curtain back hard enough to make the rod shake. There was no one there. The mirror reflected my own pale face and wide eyes. I checked behind the curtains, half expecting someone to be crouched there. But all I saw was the city lights far below, steady and uncaring. I stood in the middle of the room listening. The air conditioner hummed softly. Somewhere far away, I could hear faint traffic noise. Everything felt normal, but my body did not believe it. I looked at the clock by the bed. It was 3:15 a.m. I sat back down, trying to think clearly. I told myself it could have been a dream, a sudden jerk, my body reacting to exhaustion. But the pain on my back felt real. When I reached behind me, the spot was sore, sensitive to the touch. I stayed sitting up for a long time, afraid to lie back down. I left every light on. The room felt too bright, but I did not care. I did not sleep again after that. I watched the minutes crawl by. Every small sound made me tense. The walls felt thinner, the room smaller. When morning finally came and the sky outside began to lighten, I felt no relief, only a dull, heavy tiredness. At 6 a.m. I went down for breakfast. The dining area was busy, full of people laughing softly, clinking plates, starting their day like nothing was wrong. I ate mechanically, barely tasting the food. I kept thinking about the impact, the sound, the locked door. I could not find a clean explanation that satisfied me. After breakfast, I went straight back to my room, packed my things quickly, and checked out as soon as I could. I did not tell anyone from my team what happened. Saying it out loud made it feel unreal, and I did not want it dismissed as stress or imagination. As I walked out of the hotel, into the noise and heat of the city, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Nothing followed me after that night. No more sounds, no more strange sensations. Life went on as usual, but even now, I remember how real it felt, how awake I was, how solid the impact was through that thick comforter. I do not think it was something supernatural. I think it was my body and mind pushed too far, reacting in a way that felt violent and real. That does not make it less disturbing. It makes it worse. Because it means that sometimes, even in a locked room high above the city, your own mind can turn against you when you least expect it. I grew up spending a lot of time in church buildings, long quiet hours sitting on padded benches that smelled like old fabric and cleaning spray. The lights were always a little too bright, the walls too beige, and the air felt heavy in a way I could never explain when I was younger. As a kid, I learned early that nothing was supposed to happen there. Everything was meant to be calm, respectful, controlled. That idea is what made the strange moments stick with me. They felt wrong not because they were loud or violent, but because they broke the rules of a place built on routine and silence. One time my older brother was asked to give a talk. He stood up there nervous but confident enough to keep going when he finished early. Instead of sitting down, he pulled out a harmonica from his pocket and started playing a slow hymn. The sound echoed in the room, thin and sharp, not meant for a space like that. I remember watching the people on the stand shift in their seats. One of the leaders began to stand, then slowly sat back down. No one stopped my brother. The song went on longer than it should have. It felt stretched, like time slowed and everyone was trapped listening. After that, he was never asked to speak again. Nobody explained why. It was just quietly understood. At my mom's old ward, there was a woman who brought a chihuahua into the meeting. She held it close, wrapped in a blanket, like it was a baby. At some point she fed it the sacrament bread. I remember the small chewing motion and the way people pretended not to see it. No one reacted. No one said anything. The silence was worse than if someone had caused a scene. It was like watching something clearly wrong happen while everyone agreed to ignore it. Another time, a woman brought her bearded dragon to the meeting. It sat calmly on her shoulder, blinking slowly under the fluorescent lights. It was strange but somehow accepted. I even reached out and touched its rough skin, surprised by how warm it felt. I remember thinking how out of place it was, a desert animal under a chapel ceiling, and yet nobody stopped it. That contrast stayed with me, the idea that some things were allowed simply because no one wanted to deal with them. There were moments that felt funny at the time, but became unsettling when I thought about them later. A kid once caused such a disruption that his father had to carry him out. As they moved down the aisle, the child panicked and clutched himself, begging in pure fear. The sound of it cut through the room. People stared straight ahead. The meeting continued like nothing had happened. The idea that fear could be so visible and still ignored stuck with me. At my mom's old ward, a teenage girl ended her talk by dedicating a song to the bishop and then sang it right there. She stood next to him, pouring emotion into every note. Her voice cracked and strained. The bishop sat stiff, smiling in a way that looked painful. The room felt tight, like everyone was holding their breath. It went on far too long. When it ended, people clapped politely and then never spoke of it again. In my own ward, a man started his talk by saying how much he loved a cartoon character from a kid's show. It came out of nowhere and had nothing to do with the topic. People laughed nervously, then settled back into their seats. I remember thinking how fragile the order was, how one unexpected sentence could shake the whole room. When I was really little, during Sunday school, I took a glue stick and rubbed it all over one of the chairs. I liked the way it felt slick and wrong under my fingers. When the teacher noticed, her face hardened in a way I had never seen before. She didn't yell, but the disappointment felt heavy, like I had damaged something sacred. That moment taught me that mistakes were not welcome there. Once, during sacrament meeting, a man fell asleep behind us and started snoring. It wasn't loud at first, just a soft rattling sound, but it grew deeper and more steady. People shifted uncomfortably. No one woke him. The sound filled the quiet room, a reminder that bodies still existed even when everyone pretended they didn't. As I got older, these memories started to blend together. None of them were terrifying on their own. There was no violence, no monsters, nothing supernatural. What scared me was the pattern. Every strange thing was met with the same response: silence, acceptance, then quiet punishment later, like not being invited back to speak, or being talked about in low voices after the fact. I realized the fear came from understanding that the building wasn't a place where things were resolved. It was a place where they were absorbed. Anything uncomfortable was swallowed and buried under routine. You could embarrass yourself, expose fear, cross lines, and the room would still sit there, calm and patient, waiting for the next meeting. The older I got, the more I noticed how people changed when they walked inside. Shoulders stiffened. Faces settled into practiced expressions. Even laughter sounded controlled. I started to feel watched, not by anything unseen, but by expectations. The real horror was knowing that if something went wrong, truly wrong, it would be handled the same way, with silence first and consequences later, away from everyone else. Eventually, I stopped going. Years passed. But sometimes I still think about those benches, the lights, the way the room felt sealed off from the outside world. I understand now that what scared me wasn't the odd events themselves. It was learning how easily a group of people could pretend nothing happened, how order mattered more than honesty. That realization stayed with me. It taught me to be wary of quiet rooms and polite smiles. It taught me that the scariest places aren't loud or chaotic. They are the ones where anything can happen, and everyone agrees to sit still and let it pass. The weekend that movie came out already felt heavy, before anything even happened. It was one of those weekends where everything important seemed stacked too close together, like life was daring you to drop something. The movie had been hyped for years, and even though I don't usually get swept up in superhero stuff, I had watched my husband count the days down like a kid before a birthday. He had avoided the internet, muted words, skipped group chats, all of it. We went to see it late Saturday night, tired but happy, sitting in the dark with that quiet feeling that comes from finally finishing something you've waited a long time for. Sunday morning came fast. Church always had that same smell of carpet cleaner and old books, and that same low hum of people settling into their seats. I remember thinking how strange it felt that something as big as that movie was still buzzing in my head. while we sat there in our normal clothes, doing our normal routine. It felt like two different worlds touching for a second. When the sister from our ward stood up to give her talk, I wasn't paying much attention at first. My mind was still foggy from the night before. She started talking about Christ-like archetypes, about sacrifice and choosing others over yourself. It sounded normal enough. Then she mentioned the movie by name. That caught my attention, but I still didn't feel worried. People reference movies all the time without saying much. Then she started laying it all out. Not vague themes, not hints, but the whole thing. The deaths, the sacrifices, the ending, the exact moments that people had been desperately trying to protect from being ruined. She said she didn't really care about the movie herself, so it didn't matter to her. She even said that if anyone didn't want spoilers, they could leave. I remember the air in the room changing. You could feel people stiffen. Some heads turned. A few people stood up and walked out, trying to be polite, but also clearly annoyed. It was awkward in a way that made my stomach tighten. I glanced at my husband, relieved that we had already seen it, but still uncomfortable. Church is supposed to feel safe and predictable. And suddenly it didn't. It felt careless, like someone swinging their arms around in a crowded room. The talk kept going, and I stopped hearing the words clearly. All I could think about was how many people in that room had probably been waiting just as long as my husband had. How this was the one place they didn't expect something like that to happen. The mix of humor and discomfort sat wrong with me. People smiled tightly. Others stared straight ahead. It ended and the meeting moved on, but the feeling stayed. Later that day, when things had quieted down, we told the story to the woman I worked for. I was a nanny at the time, and she was very online, the kind of person who always had her phone nearby, always aware of what was trending. She wasn't a member, and church stories to her were usually just strange little glimpses into another world. She thought it was hilarious. To her, it was absurd in a harmless way, like a sketch from a show. I didn't think much of it when she laughed. I should have, but I didn't. She had a large following, and I knew that, but it still didn't feel real. It felt distant, like telling a story to someone and assuming it would stay in that room. Then she posted about it. I didn't see it right away. I found out later, scrolling on my phone in that distracted way you do when you're half resting and half avoiding your thoughts. There it was. The story, simplified and sharpened, framed for humor. It didn't name the sister, but it didn't need to. The details were enough. People in the comments recognized the type immediately. They filled in the blanks themselves. The comments were the worst part. People were cruel in ways that felt casual to them and heavy to me. They mocked her intelligence. They mocked her faith. They mocked her appearance. Things they couldn't even know. It turned into something ugly fast, the way online things always do. The posts spread. People tagged others. The joke grew teeth. I felt sick. Not the dramatic kind of fear, but a slow, crawling dread. I imagined the sister from church seeing it late at night, alone, scrolling. I imagined her realizing that something she had said in a place she thought was private had escaped into a crowd of strangers. I imagined her recognizing herself in every line. I imagined the humiliation settling in her chest like a weight she couldn't put down. I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't commented. I hadn't shared it. But I had told the story. I had laughed along. I had let it exist outside where it belonged. That felt worse than if I had done something loud. It felt like guilt with nowhere to go. Over the next few days, church felt different. I watched people more closely. I noticed how careful everyone seemed, how guarded. I noticed how easy it would be for any small moment to be taken, twisted, and sent somewhere it couldn't be called back from. Nothing supernatural happened. No big confrontation. No dramatic fallout. Just a quiet shift. I don't know if she ever saw the post. I don't know if anyone told her. I don't know if she recognized herself. But the fear stayed with me anyway. It wasn't about spoilers or movies anymore. It was about how thin the line is between a story and a weapon. How quickly something ordinary can turn into something that hurts real people. The ending of that weekend wasn't loud. It was me lying awake, thinking about how permanent the internet is, how careless humor can be, how easy it is to forget that other people don't stop existing when they leave the room. The story ended, the post faded, and the comments moved on to something else. But the feeling didn't. It settled into me as a quiet warning. Now, whenever I think about that movie, I don't think about the heroes or the sacrifices on screen. I think about that room, that post, and the realization that the scariest part wasn't what was spoiled, but how quickly we all forgot to be careful with each other.